Everyone, I'm Mark de Grasse, and this is Podcast Mark, where I have friends and colleagues on to discuss personal development, professional development, and business development in that order. And usually it gets all mixed up, and we talk about fatherhood and life and crazy things that are happening in the world. So with that said, I have one of my crazier friends. No, I'm just kidding. Mark Soenen. He's another dad at my son's school. We have a lot of intersecting interests with programming and AI and kind of tech business. So I figure it'd be good to have you on and talk about how you kind of, are developing with your process of learning AI, and then where you think it's going to take us all, because I think programming is like the bottleneck that is now not there anymore. It's what it was. So welcome to the show.
Awesome. Thanks, Mark. Thanks for having me on.
All right. So I remember, you were asking about ChatGPT a while back, and I
Yeah.
was like, yes, it could do all the things you need. Please just try it
Yeah.
out. Can you kind of talk about your process of kind of finding AI and then how you've been using it so far?
Yeah. Well, it's funny because I look back and it was about a year ago. You and I were at some early morning basketball game, and we're the only ones kind of geeking out on tech. And, uh, I was definitely skeptic at the time of AI, and you were it looked like you had, just spent all week like diving in. You were so excited about it. And I was really like, I got to check this out. And, the reason I was skeptic is I have a couple decades in development, and that it makes me feel old when I say that. But I realize that the promise of code generation has been around and AI for a long, long time, and it never has really come to fruition in a significant manner. Maybe some really edge use cases, and I don't know, Department of Defense. Like it's never been mainstream. You use it every day. You consider it on every application, and it just becomes a part of the daily life, which I consider sort of an exponential step forward. So we've had these exponential step forwards like mobile applications, and even I was even around when we went from command line links browsing to the next year having Netscape Navigator, to the next year having full online ordering. So I kind of that's when I was in school and coming out of school. So I got to see a pretty big transition. So I do think that AI is at that level. And you asked, so how did I be? And I'm still skeptical, and I'll explain my skepticism now. My skepticism now is not, will it be around? Will it be useful? It will be, how will it be used? But my skepticism was, it's never really worked. Code generation, it just wasn't practical, any of it. Then my skepticism was, okay, where does this data come from? How good is the output? Am I cheating? Like, is this something I can't use? I shouldn't use this. There's a little bit of pride. Like, it's not mine. It's not invented here. I want to write this, that kind of thing. But when I got to start using it on my daily kind of task, where I would get, some information, it could be a list of things, could be a spreadsheet or whatever. And I'm like, man, I'm not going to spend a half a day just reformatting this, answering 15 questions that are boring. I've answered before. I got to write another, answer to it. Just things that were so time consuming. I just tried to start using Chat GPT and say, hey, here's some text, rewrite this, summarize it. And it was started spitting out the results. And I was pretty surprised at how elegant, it wrote, how elegant it came out, and how spot on it was. That was one example where I'm like, okay, I can start offloading some of the things I don't want to do. So I started using it kind of one off like that. Then I started using it, but I was really skeptical about the code stuff, because I'm like, it can't possibly, generate. It may be able to generate like a specific language, and like, okay, write a program, that kind of outputs this, something really basic, hello world. But a colleague of mine pulled it up one time, and we were doing an integration. So it was like an e-commerce site or e-commerce SaaS application that had a REST API, a content management system that had a REST API, and a Next.js application running a front end website.
Hmm.
So pretty specific stuff, right? I mean, it's and I'm thinking, there's no way this is going to work as he's typing it in. He types in something to the effect of build a shopping cart page that offers promotions using Contentful for that was the content platform for the rich description on a product, and use commerce tools for the add to the cart functionality. It was something kind of like pretty detailed like that. And it's just like, spitting out this thing in like less than 5 seconds, like everything you needed to do, the steps, the APIs you needed to call, code examples. And I'm like, wow.
That
I
was
mean, I couldn't pick it up and just run it, but I would, what it spit out was something I might have spent a week noodling on.
yeah,
And
formula.
it wasn't complicated, but it was the fact that I didn't have to sift through all the documentation. I mean, Google's great. There's tons of all this data I know is there, but drawing all the connections and then the context changing. So like, okay, coming back to it after I went and did something else, or, but just the level of detail that it knew the products, it knew the use case, it knew just exactly the functionality I was trying to achieve as well, and it actually documented it for me all in 5 seconds or 10 seconds, or I mean, it was probably
Nothing.
5 6, yeah. And that's where I was really like, well, this is like gonna change everything.
Oh yeah.
um and that was just one prompt, and so then I took what he did. I actually built a demo in a couple days because something that would take me 2 weeks maybe, and realized that, yeah, I got to use, I always have to go to this first to see how far it can get me, and leverage it. So that was my first experience, and that happened probably a couple of months after our first conversation. So I've been doing that for about 8 months now, and it's really changed the way I work for sure.
Well, and that's fantastic because I think that's the best way to get started, because a lot of people think like, write me a book, and then you're like, don't do that. Like, that's, of course that's going to be crap. Like, do it something that you need, like this instant that you would have spent 5 minutes on, and see if it could be faster using AI. And that's kind of where I started getting excited, because I would do things like, okay, I need a social media schedule for this company, and I want it to be consistent, and I want every third day to be this, and I want every Friday to be that. And then here's a list of like 100 different post types. And I was like, yeah, you could do that. It's not complicated to go through and pick your stuff. But instead, it's just like, here's all the crap. Make me a table with all the answers. And then it's just doop. And you're like, wow, that's it's not perfect, but it's like an amazing starting point where, some projects you wouldn't even try that you're now. And that's the fun part I'm seeing with AI, where it's just like I'm taking things like ideas I have, and I'm like, I never would have even thought about developing this, but now it's so easy that why the heck not? So
Yeah.
in that regard, are you finding that you're starting to do more stuff, like more complicated stuff, just because now it's like way easier than it was before?
Yeah. I mean, it's uh, anytime I hit a roadblock, I ask it something, if it's, I can't figure out how to like an algorithm for a specific
Yeah.
task, even just parsing data. Somebody gives me a big data file, and I just need it pared down. I run it through there. I need it reduced like into something I can manage, or something filtered out of it. I mean, I got pretty good with writing code and using Excel or whatever the tools were, but I mean, in 5 seconds, I got this thing done, and I'm on to the next thing. It's just kind of like, yeah, I mean, it's like, why did, that's definitely when you start realizing how much time you're saving.
Ugh.
It's, and then the other thing is we never had, and that, as a developer, and an architect, we never have time to do everything just right in an engineering sense, where we provide all the documentation. Here's all the blueprints. Here's what this code does. There's unit tests like in this code. Like I mean, we say we're going to do it. It
Yeah, you
makes
want to
more
do
high
it.
quality code, but like there are all these shortcut or these corners that get cut just to get a project done. Whereas now it's like, I feel like we can give a customer or a client or a team
Mm.
way better, more comprehensive product delivery than we ever have in the past. Like we all, we've been able to give customers really innovative products, and they do great things, but it's kind of called technical debt. So over time, like when you don't like have all the testing and stuff like that, there's debt in the system that has to be removed that was never discovered. And so I just think it's a more sustainable product output when you're building anything now, because you're able to generate unit tests, you're able to create documentation. So when a maintenance team picks up the project, they're not just looking at the code like for documentation, because we've generated it for them. So those kind of use cases for sure. And then on the flip side, when you're designing the product itself, I can go in to ChatGPT and say, build me a UML diagram for a shopping, for adding a product to a shopping cart. What are the 9 steps to do that? And use these platforms as well. And it will generate a text port, version of the diagram with the right calls, but in a visual format. You still have to bridge it together and
Yeah, you still
format
gotta do
it.
the work.
But again, it's like I could spend 3 or 4 days like really getting that right. Whereas like it got it 80% right. And then I spent a couple hours tweaking it and I present it to a team that day. So, and when I said that's part of the design of software process, once that design is kind of perfected, we can go build it. And so like all of a sudden now a team is saving all that time. So
What do you think the time savings have been? Because I remember you telling me about one project that was like supposed to be 40 hours and then it was like 2 hours and it was, you know,
that was one. Yeah, well, it was one, it was like 10 changes that needed to be made. It was a maintenance kind of like thing.
yeah.
And you know, it just took way less time and we can move on to the enhancement portions and that kind of thing. So yeah, I mean, it depends on the task. I mean,
Yeah. Yeah,
but
there's
like
stuff that it doesn't work.
there is definitely times when you're well over several 100% savings in time, like just
But
because you've generated something. And I kind of mixed a couple topics there, the time efficiency, but also the um, undelivered assets that happen when you deliver a product, like the documentation and
yeah,
the, yeah,
like a completely finished project, like you would have spent, like we all wish we could do because you're like, oh, I know I could, if I added this onto there, they'd appreciate it more. And in the future, they'd probably even notice it. But at least I'm
yeah,
filling my contract in the way that's like, here's exactly what we said was going to be delivered. And
right.
you don't have to fill it with, for me, like I would make projects, but then it has to be like the dummy content, for website development, it's always Latin phrases. And now I
Yeah.
think back, I'm like, man, if I still had my website agency, I could have just made amazing content for a whole website, not waited for the client to be like, could you please answer these questions so I could keep working, and still have like really good copy. And so, I remember one website I made, they just would refuse to get me content. So I ended up doing the same paragraph for all of the text. And then nobody noticed. That was the funniest part because I was like, oh, you didn't give me anything, so I'll just use the same paragraph over and over again.
Yeah.
But now
Uh,
you could do you could do all that extra stuff. So where do you think this means for the profession of programming? Because I've been telling people that programmers are going to be like wizards now because you're able to be 10 to 100 times more effective. But do you think it's going to I don't see there being a less need for programmers. What's your take on it?
yeah, I don't, I think the myth is, oh, it's going to eliminate all these jobs. And I don't think that's the case at all. I think it's just going to make it faster, and it's going to make it, it's actually you're going to be able to ramp up
Hmm.
junior resources quicker.
Ah,
Because the funny thing is I'm old. I'm experienced, highly experienced. I've seen a lot. I've written a lot of code. But the younger kids are coming out and they haven't written a lot of code, but they know they're super smart. They know all the new frameworks. They know like a lot of the cool stuff coming out. Some of them are not as adoptive
hmm.
of this tech, which is weird because you think like, oh, like I would be the one I'm never using it. Because I screen a lot of candidates, and sometimes I'm like, I know that they know more about a specific language than me or a specific technology, and I try to ask them questions like, how do you approach problems? It's about the problem solving, and there's some specific questions I ask, but and I always ask now, I always ask, how do you use Chat GPT? Like, what do you use
Mm,
it for? Why would you use it? And I would say over 50% say they don't.
you don't at all.
And I'm like, that's crazy. And what I think and I try to figure out like, well, what is it? I think it's a couple things. They're new to the game and they have really a passion for writing code and they love it. And it's that not invented, I didn't do it kind of mentality.
Mhm.
I totally understand it. When I was young, I probably 98% of the code I wrote was throwaway, but I was just like hacking away, like loving it.
Fun.
The other thing is, I don't know if they know how to ask the right questions. And
Mm,
so that's when it was eye-opening to me too, is it's not replacing jobs. It's like a good word processor doesn't make a great writer.
yeah.
Um, and it's like you have to know how to ask the right questions in the right way to get the first great answer, like which it usually has. But then if you really get good at it, you're asking the next five questions, and it becomes super powerful. And I don't know if the some of these entry level who are super good at what they do, you see that yet because they don't necessarily have the experience of figuring out like how to ask questions. They have the experience of how to like hack something and not and really write a lot of code really quick that does a lot of things. And so I think over time, everybody will realize, hey, this is I'm going to get me there way faster. Even just learning a technology, because when you're in technology consulting, or when you're bouncing from client to client, which I know you've done a lot in your life,
Mhm.
the game changes every time. It's
Yeah.
it's
Like
this customer uses this technology, this customer uses that technology. You're constantly thrown into deep waters and things that you may not have ever done. And so being able to go really quickly and say, okay, here's my use case. Here's what I'm trying to do. Show me how to do it in this language or, Python, Node.js, Java, Microsoft. It can give me five examples of how to do this one thing. And I'm learning that, I mean, I'm ingesting that almost immediately. And I think when people realize that that's what it does too, is it enables you to ramp up much faster. They'll start to use it even more.
Yeah, well, I totally agree because I think it's it is that kind of like ego side where it's like, oh, I do this for real. Like I can't cut corners. It's like, what are you
Yeah,
talking about? Because it's so much faster. And honestly, I'm guessing it's better, at least for some people, because everybody's not a plus, coder. There's a lot of people who don't write very well, and now they could probably do like a million times more just because they don't necessarily have to write the code, but they understand where it belongs, which is
right,
why I always say, like, okay, you're a programmer, and yes, somebody could write whatever code they want, but they don't have your understanding of how all of those systems integrate together and what
right.
could go wrong and which parameters you really need and all these other kind of nuances. So it doesn't mean their code's going to be good if they don't have that understanding that you have. But with that said, do you think more people, since it is slightly easier and people aren't having to learn a whole language necessarily, will there be more programmers?
I think there'll be more people. Well, I mean, so I think you either have a passion for code or not. Like,
Yeah, that's true.
I think if I think that it'll might bring people back to the game who were coders, enjoyed coding, but just kind of not pushed out, but got turned off because they weren't it was tough to get on a project or whatever it was because they weren't as good as potential others, but they understood maybe the business or they understood how software should be built.
Hmm.
I think it'll bring some of those people back in because they realize, oh, I don't have to like really make this perfect, but I know how to kind of piece it together. Because at the end of the day, a lot of times when you're building something for a company, they don't know what they want anyway. So you're prototyping, like you're constantly prototyping. You're trying to help them figure out and fail quickly. Like this
Mhm.
isn't going to work. That's not going to work. It's like this. I'll believe it. I'll understand it when I see it, kind of thing.
Yeah,
And
yeah.
so I think it'll bring a lot of people back in that can say, well, I can show you this, I can show you that. And, then we can figure out, okay, does this work or not? and then we can have a team go build it or whatnot. I mean, so I think there's a little bit of that element. Just the experimentation is going to draw people in back into coding that maybe haven't been coding for a long time because they got tired of the grind or whatnot.
Imagine a world where your brand transcends visibility, embedding itself into the consciousness of your customers. Welcome to the AI Branding Bootcamp, where this vision becomes reality. Dive into AI-powered research, strategy, and execution to create a brand that's not just recognized, but felt. From crafting your brand's avatar to mastering AI-generated content, emerge with a brand that resonates deeply. Ready to transform your brand into an unforgettable experience? Join us at the AI Branding Bootcamp. The future of branding begins now. Yeah, I'm working so hard, and at the end of the day, like, it's still not there yet, so you can't even see if it works or not. Like that
Yeah.
would be really frustrating. Where you're like, oh, and go, and then it's like,
Yeah.
nope.
I've been looking at the same 5 lines of code all day, and then you wake up the next morning and make two like change it works. And it's
Oh,
yeah.
well, and actually for me, like that helps a ton with AI. Sometimes I'll save my AI stuff because by the late afternoon, I'm kind of just fried. And so I'm like, I need something that I don't have to think very hard about. And then I'll do like transcription processing, and I'll do all the stuff that is like brain dead things that I could just put some prompts into AI, and then it's doing all this work, even though I can't even think right now. So
Yeah.
that's a good way to use it. And just the fun side. Do you ever do anything fun with AI? That's I use it all the time.
um yeah, I mean, it's just like I start saying like, what's the best way to, I don't know, do some kind of home project or
Oh
whatever. Like
yeah.
it's almost like that becomes more of a Google use case.
Hmm.
Um I'm just starting to kind of dabble in it in that way. Like
Oh, it's fantastic. It saves so much time.
just to kind of like get a different perspective that's not Google, that because what it does is it takes your question and it doesn't just spit out a bunch of results. It takes those results and sort of like summarizes those and then applies the knowledge to something that's practically it's usable. Whereas like you could do like 10 different, you can do all this research on Google, get all the information you want, but then you just still have this pile of stuff that's not connected.
Mm.
Um, and so I think there's going to be a lot. I mean, I do a lot of stuff around the house. It's like here's what I do. I want to wire all my stuff. I want to like run speaker wire all through my yard. And I want to use like a 70-volt architecture, if they call it, where it's like a restaurant, right? So you're just tapping. You can put speakers on. You can tap out. They're powered. You can tap out the much, about the amount of power you want. I want a commercial speaker system in my backyard. But
Everybody
anyway,
does.
so I've done a ton of research over the last 2 years on kind of all the things that, how it works. But I tried to put it in there the other day and say, like, well, what are the steps to go getting this done? And like, what do I need to consider? And like, what kind of materials do I need? And it kind of spit out like what I had done already in the last 3 years. It didn't spit out like specific products to go buy, like this is the amplifier you want, these are the speakers, but it gave me a better guide
Mm.
on getting started. Because every time I go to get started on this, I start just thinking, well, maybe I'll just buy the wire and run it first.
Yeah.
But now that I have this thing, I can go knock the project out faster because it sort of gave me a plan.
Oh yeah. Well, and actually, I like that too, where you get kind of confirmation. Like you're kind of like, well, I was thinking this, but maybe I'm totally
Yeah.
missing the mark. And then you just put the
Yeah.
question in AI. It's like, here you
Second
go.
guessing yourself.
Yeah. It's like, no, just run it by the machine and it'll tell you. And that's actually one of the biggest benefits that I always tell people. I'm like, there's some questions that you want to ask, but if you asked it to a person, they would discriminate against you, or you'd feel like an idiot, or some reason that you don't want to ask people. And honestly, you want an unbiased answer is usually why I do it. Cause I'm like, I know if I ask like, hey, well, what's the best method for doing this to a big group of people, they may give you like the solution that they're selling, or they may give you the solution. Well, here in Texas, one of the funniest things we noticed was that people will give you a referral and they'll blow up that referral like, oh, this is the most amazing blah 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 ever, you should totally use him. And then you use them and you're like, this guy's terrible, like what's going on? And then you find out that like, oh yeah, that's the guy's next door neighbor, and that's why he was
Misery.
promoting him
Yeah.
so much.
Yeah.
And so with
And he
AI,
doesn't use them anymore either.
he never uses it because he knows what the heck the guy does. And
Yeah,
sometimes you just want to be like, oh, just tell me, just give me the answer. Like I don't need some biased, twisted answer that has all these motivations that I don't even understand. I just need an answer. Just give me
right.
that. So I think that's huge. Well, and I think the programming side is enormous too. Now, I don't know if this is anecdotal or not, but I've noticed that seems like more brands are coming out with stuff faster in terms of like reward applications and even apps just for the big companies that have never had an app and now they're starting to release them. I'm like, oh wow, this
Yeah.
is interesting. Do you think that's a reflection of the kind of AI change and people are just doing stuff faster?
Yeah, I think so. There's not a lot of like analysis anymore. Like I said, you can prototype something really quickly now and get more ideas,
Mm.
excuse me, and generate products, generate completed tasks, generate marketing messaging, like you're saying. I think there's danger in that though.
Mm.
I'm glad you brought up discrimination. I mean, it's funny because the thesis that our kids are required to do. I went to one 4 years ago that talked about the ethics of AI. I mean,
Oh
this was four
wow,
years ago.
4 years ago.
It was more focused on like the decision of it, like a car. Like if it had the choice to run,
They'll
hit
run over
somebody
into
riding a
somebody.
bike or hit the other car. At some point, there's ethics and there's things you have to consider. So I am always monitoring that in my head because the stuff I look at for programming, it's way easier to give an unbiased answer. I mean, there's probably some like something they could do, like Microsoft could be pushing me towards Microsoft
Oh
technology
yeah.
or whatnot. But to your point, I do believe people are generating, like, we're full speed ahead, we're more productive, we're generating more stuff. But I think the carelessness of looking at the output will
Uh,
eventually bite us in some ways. Like, um,
I've done
I mean,
that.
sometimes I'll admit, like, I just hit send because it sounds great, and I kind of skimmed it over, and like there could be one thing in there that could get me in a lot of trouble. So I always have
Step
to, I have
back.
to remind myself that this was generated by machine. I still have to proof it. But yes is the answer to what you're saying. That's what I think is happening, and maybe that was a secret sauce for years for a lot of
Oh, you're right.
of people that may have
Biggest
had
company.
more access to it than and that so that's my other skepticism. It's like, how did they get all this data? Like at some point, I
Yeah, they
just
had to.
it's like I've always wondered, like, should I put my code in GitHub? Like, not that the code I have is like super IP, but like
Still there.
if it's free to me, there's got to be a catch somewhere. And I think they've been getting all the data, and now we have a super tool that's making me it's doing good for sure. It's doing good. It's helping business, it's helping people, but I'm always skeptical, like, where is it going to take a turn for the wrong direction, and how are we going to deal with it? Which I think is good that that's actually starting to, people are asking that question a little bit.
Well, what's funny is that it already happened in marketing because when I originally talked to you about it like a year plus ago, it was incredible. Like the stuff that ChatGPT could do, it was just like, oh my gosh, like I'm never gonna have to think again. Like this thing just does a great job. And then I think by April, May, the system had actually gotten dumber, where it was like, and even now, sometimes you put something in and it just spits out just junk. And I'm like, what happened? And what I found was that I had already become kind of reliant on it producing this awesome stuff all the time. And then when it stopped, I was like, oh crap, I got to think about these things again. Like I
Yeah.
haven't had to think for a while.
Yeah.
And it's really easy to get into that where you actually become dependent on the tool and then you're like, oh crap, I didn't even realize that I fell into this. So with that said, do you think it's possible to maintain kind of like your core coding skills while also using it? Like, should you be writing code for fun more often? Like, how are you going to keep up to date?
Yeah, well, I mean, I think I don't over allocate the use of it. I kind of, I mean, a lot of people think it should be embedded in every single aspect of these products, and
Oh, yeah, I hear that.
it's
I'm
just,
like,
there's no
what?
silver bullet. There's
Yeah.
no, like, it's not the solution for everything. It's I'm just still in the mode of like, it's the first place I go look if I have hit a wall, like, and it's making me better, but I also know that there's a lot more that goes into producing a good product. Like I was just thinking today, like, when you're leading a team and you're looking for input, you have 7 people, 8 people on the team, and you're trying to get somewhere. It doesn't solve all of that problem. Yes, it's great when you lock in on certain things, but there still is a lot of things we have to do in our day-to-day job that are just about communication and relationships. And I'm just not one to be like, we're all in on the digital world, because there still is, the physical world and things we have to do. So just not becoming, and also not taking it for granted, like, well, that's due Friday, like the procrastination
Yeah.
symptom. That's due
Thursday
Friday. I'll
night,
just pour my
Friday morning.
coffee on Friday at 6 a.m. It's due at noon. I'll have it all done, because that's, I've thought I've been there before, not with Chat GPT, but with the other things, like, oh, this team's taking care of this, or like, I already have that document, like, and then you
Yeah.
can't find it. Like
Oh
there.
God. Yeah.
So, I mean, I just think I've learned so much in the past on never relying on something that,
Too much.
completely. Yeah.
Yeah. But then again, it's kind of like, man, I'm sure people said that about like horses and carriages and stuff. Like, I'm gonna keep one.
Yeah.
I'm gonna keep
Right.
one to buy a car, but
Yeah.
just in case. So I do think there's a transitional period of like, okay, now it's gonna be so capable. And right now it is multiple steps. And that's what a lot of people don't understand, because they can only see the prompt engineering, right? Where it's like, oh, well, once I know how to prompt engineer, I'm gonna be, making all these things. It's like, no, I think that's like a beginner version of AI, and pretty soon it's going to evolve into this like task thing where you're like, you
Yeah.
don't have to prompt it every single time. You just give it like, here's the objective, run as many prompts as you need, just get me the objective. And at that point, then it really is going to be tricky, because it's going to be
Yeah.
like that you could spend another 10 minutes doing the prompts, but why not have 10 seconds and have the entire thing created? And they're like, oh man, that sounds pretty sweet.
Yeah.
So
So
it's gonna be tough.
what thought I had, like, I don't know about you, but why has Siri gotten worse? Because
Oh, so much worse.
Siri was like kind of the first. It drives Sarah nuts. It's like
Well, it's like
I will
Alexa
just
too. Like
I
both of
just
those
go to
suck.
Siri, because, like, I want to say delete all my reminders. Like, I know, because I don't want to click 5 clicks. Things like that. But Siri has gotten worse and AI is getting better. So I don't know why. I
Oh,
can't figure it out. But
I can't figure that out either. We use Alexa for like one thing, and it's to turn my son Damien's TV off when it's time to go, time to stop. And it's just
it's
like,
like Clapper.
oh man, but even then you end up having to yell at it. And then if there's any other noise going on, I can't hear you. And then you could literally say exactly what to say and it'll repeat, did you mean? And then it says the same thing you said again. And it's just like, this is the dumbest thing. I think my theory is that there's too much input that it's taking in order to steal all your information and feed
Oh
you
yeah.
ads than it is to
I,
help you.
or they were using patented technology they no longer have access to. It's the same thing as Waze. Like, Waze was awesome until Google bought it. Like
Ah,
it's
man,
just, I
yeah.
don't know.
Well, because then it got Googleized, and it's like, well, that
Yeah.
was fun. Who cares? It was like 500 million, like whatever. And you're like, you just destroyed a whole business.
Yeah. Yeah.
Doesn't matter. Well, it should be interesting. Last question. What do you see, just for 2024? I mean, what do you think by the end of this year we'll be able to do? Or is it just kind of like pretty much going to stay like this? And any theories?
Um, yeah, I think it'll be a lot more adoption.
Yeah.
But I don't know if it's going to take as big a leap as it did this year. I think, yeah, I'm watching it because I'm in e-commerce, so we do a lot of like online, ordering systems, both for consumers and for businesses. So I think there's a big push to integrate it all into that. And, um, content management. So I actually did a thesis back in 2008 over content management and how it's not scalable to manage a seasonal product catalog. So I worked for Hallmark for a long time, but like all these retailers have to turn their catalogs over in the 6 months of the year where the holidays are.
Yeah.
Just constantly turning over the catalogs, and they have teams managing all that content. My conclusion was AI is the only way to do that because it's just too much to have a manual team. So I think content management for sure is
Yeah.
going to keep getting better. I think that content generation, like, so I know you do some crazy stuff generating not only text but images and that kind of thing. So I think that's going to be apparent. It's exactly what you said, where the ads and the targeting and all that stuff is so much faster and better. I think that's going to continue for sure.
Mm.
Um, but I'm seeing slower adoption than I would have anticipated from development community.
I completely agree. Well, not just the development community, but even, I talk to CEOs and CMOs and other C-suite people, and they're kind of like, "Oh yeah, no, I should try it sometime." I'm like, "What?" Like, just in terms of like regular meetings and just processing like emails that would take a while. Like, I mean,
Right,
the just the practical side for any kind of manager or executive is just like, man, you could cut your workload down by like half, like all of
right.
that time you spent. Well, for like presentation, so I do presentations all the time, and I'm like, oh man, I really would like to have some supporting information for this argument. And then I'm like, give me supporting information for this argument, and then it just gives me the stuff. I'm like, I barely have to write anymore. I just have to have the idea.
Well,
And there you go.
yeah. Well, it's crazy. I know we're running low on time, but just 2 years ago, like I was at Oracle, right? And I did prototyping. And one of the proposals I had was we should take all meeting recordings from sales. Like we're doing that. We're at meeting recording, feed all that information to a speech to text processor, and then run that through AI and generate um, a summary so that somebody doesn't have to go watch the video. Like it was that simple of a use case. And everybody was looking at me like, we're gonna I don't get it. Like, I
Okay.
mean,
Yeah.
I'm just like, and now we have all these things that do that. They record it, and just to be able to not only knowledge transfer, I think it's gonna be huge knowledge transfer, but also like providing in sales or whatever your next steps in the next meeting, or just giving a summary. So like, and doing some of the research saying, these were the three key points this customer is focused on, because there's so much noise that happens. You get lost in it. And these are the three key points that we have to focus on in our next meeting with that customer.
Uh,
Such a simple use case, and people just like it was kind of like couldn't get it. And
no,
but
and that's
I think people are in that sense now for sure, because
well,
it was
they've
just
done it a couple times and then find out that it could do like so much more. Well, and for decision making, it's kind of like how many
yeah,
times do you have like, man, there's 10 ways to do this. Like, I don't know, I'm gonna pick the wrong one. And now you could just be like, based on these 10 ways, I have 2 hours to make this project. How fast, which would be the best
yeah.
one? And blah. And then it's just like, well, probably this one. You're like, oh, okay. I don't have to think. And so I really, and that's why I actually have a whole article I call breaker, because I was like, man, it helps you get over the hump of starting. And now you can start whatever you want. You could make progress slowly if you want, because every question you ask will spit out something that probably would have taken you, a half an hour to an hour to think up. And therefore you never would have done it. And now you can. So
Yeah.
I love talking to you because you have the programmer perspective and you're good with people, which doesn't usually go in line. But I will say that's
It's
probably
fun.
why you're doing so well with AI, because the communication, you're communicating with the machine. Like that's what's happening now. And if you don't know how to communicate with people, your own species, it's probably going to be much more difficult to
Yeah.
execute that. Even though
Well,
I
it's
understand what you're trying to say.
it's like, I career path was another thing we should talk about sometime. It's like you got to adapt. I mean, I'm still trying to figure out what I'm going to be when I'm grown up. I'm like,
I
so if I
know.
don't, so, it is so great to have this technology. Like, okay, you got to learn. It's the next thing, but it's great. And so that's what I love about it too. Is just like it's making things interesting,
Oh yeah. Well, and that's a, the last thing I'll say is that for the last 10 to 20 years, and this is actually in every facet of society, you'll actually look back and I think fashion is a good indicator of like changing times. And you can't tell whether something was produced 20 years ago or not based on the way people dress in like back then versus now. And even worse, some like the trend for young kids is like the 90s. But I think all of this is because we kind of stagnated because we got to like a certain level and it was like, well, we basically have all our needs met. There's no reason to improve anything. And the amount of effort it takes to improve things is like, is it worth it? And now since we have this, I think we're breaking that where it's like, yeah, you could start thinking big again and you could start dreaming again because it's all possible and
Yeah,
AI is making
great.
it that way. So I think it's an amazing time. And I think you're doing great work
Thank you.
incorporating
You
it.
too.
Well, you just got somebody has to try it, right? And it's
Yeah,
like, man, if you get on board, and I tell this to everybody, I'm like, man, you get on board with AI right now, we're at the very beginning. Like you will have a
yeah,
just such an epic understanding of how this thing works that then when it gets really neat, you'll be like, a wizard and it'll be awesome. So I think you're gonna be one of those. Where can people learn more about you and what you do?
thank you.
No, wait, you're supposed to tell me your website now.
I said, oh yeah, Spur Commerce, SPUR Commerce, COMMERCE.com. I've got decades of experience in e-commerce technology, which is content search, all the things around it, all the integrations. And I'd love to hear from you.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much, Mark. Really appreciate your time.
Thank
Keep
you.
on pushing those limits, and I think you're on the right track. I think like your mindset isn't like, oh, just jump in and it's the only thing to rely on, but you bring that kind of like old school with the new school, and I really think that's going to be the most powerful combo moving forward. So I think
Great.
you're gonna kill it. I'm excited for you.
Thank you.
All right. Thank you so much for listening. This has been Podcast Mark. Tune in next time for more chats about personal development, business development, and professional development.